In this video, we're going to go through the first step of setting up an authentication mechanism within our ASP.NET MVC application. So to start off for this module, I'm going to go ahead and do New Project. I'm going to choose an ASP.NET Web application, and I'm going to call this WSAD Module 8. I'm going to go ahead and choose the empty project. I'm going to check MVC. Now again, this is inside of Visual Studio 2013. The goal here is that we do not want any pre-built authentication mechanisms, and we're going to just basically build this up ourselves. So now that this is in place, the first thing that we're going to do is we need to establish a database to house our users. So we'll right click on the app data folder, choose add, and I'm going to choose a new item. From here I'm going to choose SQL Server Database, and I'm going to name my MDF file Module 8. So I now have my new MDF and LDF, and I will use the local DB of SQL to connect to this MDF and LDF. And we'll set that up in a little bit. So we have our database in place now. If we go to our Server Explorer, we'll see that we have a Module 8.mdf. We can expand on that. And then we'll see that we have currently no tables. So we'll add a table, right click, add new table. And while the designer is loading, I'll jump down here and I'm going to call this my users table. So our primary key of int, I'm going to select my primary key, go to my properties dialog, and then I want to make sure that I set this as the identity. So I'm going to say that this is true, that this is the identity field. Then I also want to add a username, and I'll make that a varchar 50. And I do not want it to be null, a password field. I'm going to set this as a varchar max. And we do not want that to be null. And then I'm going to add a first name. And I'll set that as varchar 50, not null, last name. Varchar 50 as well. And then the last thing I want to add is email. And I'll make that a varchar 100. So I now have all of my fields set in my users table, have my primary key identified. Go ahead and click update. It'll generate my create table script, and I'll hit update database. Visual Studio will go through and actually create that table. So if I go back to my Server Explorer, right click, refresh, I'll see my users table with all of my fields. So I now have my table. Go ahead and close my designer. I'm now going to come back to models. I'm going to right click on my models folder, and I want to go through the process of actually creating my model object that will be my data transfer object that I'll use for the entity framework. So I'm going to call this user, and I'll just go through and add the property equivalents to my field names. So that is one property for every field or column I've added to my database. So I'm going to also add my attribute. So this will be my table, and I'm going to bring in my using statement for data annotation schema, and my table name is users. And then this will be my key, not a foreign key, but if I hit escape and then use my accelerator, I'm going to also bring in using system.componentModel.data annotations, and that will make that attribute active. So I now have my model in place, so now I need to add my DB context. So I'll right click on models, choose add, and I like to usually add a folder first, so this will be my data portion of my models, and then I'll right click again, and then I'm going to add a class, and this will be my module 8 DB context. So first thing I'll do here is I'm going to inherit DB context. I have to add my, I neglected to actually bring in the entity framework. So before I can bring in the DB context, I need to right click on references, manage NuGet packages. And then I want to search for, first option right there, entity framework, click install, and then accept. Alright, so now I've installed the entity framework. So now I should be able to come back here, add my using statement, and then I can set up my DB set. So public DB set for user, and I like to just call mine users with a get and a set. Okay, so my class name is model8dbcontext. So I'm going to go into my web config now, and I'll actually add a connection string. So after app settings, I'll do connection strings, and I'm going to add, and then the name of this will be model8dbcontext, and the connection string will be connecting to local DB /v11 semicolon, and then my you know what, I don't actually remember my connection string that I need, so I'm going to go out to connectionstrings.com, scroll down, SQL Server, and then what we'll be using is the .NET framework, and then what I need is local DB. Oh, and here we go. So local DB automatic instance with file specified. So I'm going to just highlight that and copy, flip back to my code, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste that right in here. And then where it says attached, I'll say data directory pipe / and then mine is called module8.mdf. So that'll be my connection string. So in this video, we've gone through and kind of done the setup process for getting our authentication in place. We set up our user model, our user DB context, we added our connection string, we also created our model8 MDF database, and then added a users table with the appropriate fields. So we have our username, password, first name, last name, email, and then our ID, primary key.